Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, I want to chat a little bit deeper about the conversation that I had last week on the podcast with Jody Wilson, who is the author of A Brain That Breathes. The conversation really struck a chord with me and really resonated with me, as I know it did with so many of you. And I've been thinking a lot and doing things a bit differently since I had that conversation, which was a few weeks ago now, that I, physically had that conversation with her. And I think I just wanted to do a follow-up episode because I've been thinking about it a lot. And I know that for many of you, your parents, you're in the thick of raising kids. I know you're all at different stages. All of our listeners are. Some of you are like me and in that later stage of parenting where your kids might need you a bit less. But I know there's a lot of you that are really still in that very busy, physically demanding stage of parenting. But I think this conversation is really relevant for all of us because, as I shared in last week's podcast episode, if you didn't listen, you might want to go back and listen to that episode before this one, because I'm going to just sort of pull out some of the things that we talked about and talk about sort of my reflections on those and sort of share some things that I've been doing a little bit differently. But I shared on last week's episode that, yes, I'm in a stage of life where my kids are less physically demanding. There's less to do. They need me less. And I've noticed how uncomfortable that has been for me. So I shared a bit about that last week. I've been thinking a lot about that since the conversation as well. So many of you listening, I know, are, really proactive parents. You're researching your kids' health. You're navigating challenges like food sensitivities and eczema and allergies and behavioural changes and neurodivergent children, managing all that comes along with that. And it often means that your brain is constantly switched on, which is why I wanted to have a follow-up episode because, I think it's really important that we talk more about this. And if you listened to last week's episode, I just want to sort of point out a few key points that we talked about, that our brains are not designed for constant input like the world that we're living in is giving us now. We really rarely experience any mental quiet moments anymore because even rest now includes stimulation. And I know for me, I've got this weird obsession with always having something in my ears or, consuming, whether it's podcasts, even if it's just more conversational, lighthearted podcasts, or listening to audiobooks or scrolling on our phones or watching something, even if it's interesting and informative on the TV. Our brains are constantly on, so many of us. And I think we really need to, build in more quiet time because it's good for our mental health and our overall sort of brain function as well. So in last week's episode, Jody introduced this idea to me of soft fascination, which I loved. And I would before hearing this term soft fascination, I would have called it mindfulness. But I love this phrase, soft fascination. It's when your brain is gently engaged, but it's not working hard. So I shared the story of me going for a walk without my phone and noticing this huge gum tree just down the road from me, or just down the path from me, that I'd never really noticed before. And she said, you know what that is? That's soft fascination. So, we can do this by watching the waves at the beach or watching clouds. Remember when you were a kid and you used to watch the clouds? or watching leaves move in the wind, or just going for a walk without headphones. And what soft fascination does is it gives the brain a break from that directed attention. It allows that mental processing. I'm always talking to my teenagers about this. Like, your brain needs a break from thinking and doing. And then in those little breaks, they're like, we're all, as teenagers, kids, adults, are grabbing their phones. And so our brains are not getting a break. They're not getting that time to mentally process. Soft fascination reduces that cognitive fatigue, and it can really help support creativity and emotional regulation as well. So many of us find ourselves on our phones thinking, where did the last 20 minutes go? Imagine if we spent that 20 minutes or even just 5 minutes or even just 2 minutes in this sort of soft fascination. We could really make a difference to the way that we feel. It means that our brain isn't being bombarded with information, but it's not completely switched off either, like it is maybe when we're sleeping. And so some of the things that I've been doing to build in more of this soft fascination is there's two things really that are really easy for me to, I guess, access. One, we have a pool at home. So when I'm in the pool, which I do on warmer days, we've got a solar heater, so I can go there in there even if it's not, really hot. I'm without a device. And I can look up at the birds or can look at the trees in my garden or can just give my brain a break. And I just sort of slowly swim up and down. The good thing about having older kids in a pool is that I don't constantly have kids in the pool with me. I can be in the pool on my own. And so being in the pool, and this could go the same way with being in the ocean. When we're in the water, we can't have our device. So that's been a really good practice for me to sort of practice this soft fascination. And now I have a name for it. And the other thing that I've been doing is laying in a hammock out the front of my house. So we are very blessed to live along a scrub. And my husband, maybe a couple of months ago, put out a hammock out the front of our house. And so I will go and lay in there. And my rule is that I'm not allowed to take my phone, and even I'm not allowed to take a book. I've just got to lay there. And it's under a tree where the leaves move. So spending just 5 minutes in that hammock, it makes the world of difference to the way that I feel. So I want you to think about some things that you could potentially do to build in this soft fascination time. Going for a walk without your phone or without headphones. Sometimes you might need to take your phone. Like for me, I sometimes need to take my phone because my kids are at home and I want them to be able to reach me if they need to, but don't take my headphones so I'm not listening to something. If I can go without my phone, I do as well. So they're just, a couple of examples. Another one is cooking and doing, pottering around the house without my headphones in, because that's something I do love listening to podcasts or listening to audiobooks, but doing that without my headphones in, it just has a sort of a calmer, more relaxed feel. So I just wonder what you could do to build in some of this soft fascination time. That's the first thing I sort of wanted to talk about. Another thing I wanted to talk about is this idea that we've got all this technology at our fingertips. And I heard someone talk about this a few months ago, that technology is supposed to save us time, but in fact when we're spending a lot of time on technology, on our devices, it actually has sped up time. We're expected to do more because we have the help of technology. Faster communication means more messages. Online shopping means we don't have to leave the house, but we've got more consumption decisions. Having a phone means that we're constantly available. And when we're using productivity tools to help us save time, whether that be in work or in our lives, we either put higher expectations on ourselves or we have higher expectations put on ourselves as well. So technology has moved a lot of the friction from life, but friction is where breathing space used to exist when we waited in line, or when we were on the train, without a phone, or when we were hanging out washing maybe without earphones in. We had that time for our brain to process, for our brain to breathe. But now technology has removed a lot of that space that we used to have. And even sort of small pockets of time are now filled with more information, more input, more overload into our brain. And so, I think that's a really interesting reframe that, we think that technology is saving us all of this time, but actually if we use less technology, if we're on our devices less often, time moves more slowly. Go for a walk without your phone and it feels like time expands, as opposed to going for a walk with your headphones in, listening to something, talking to someone, and you get back and you think, what, like you didn't even notice anything on that walk. This is so important to think about, because I know so many of you, as I said at the start of the episode, are dealing with a lot when it comes to your kids' health, your kids' nutrition. That's why you listen to this podcast. And, it seems a little counterintuitive that I'm talking about listening to less podcasts as I'm talking to you on a podcast. Maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot, and we're going to be getting less podcast downloads over the coming weeks. But I think we need to be really intentional about what we are consuming. There's a lot of junk that we potentially consume. Hopefully this podcast is not one of those pieces of content that is not worth your time. But also, if we're getting less listeners, and I know that there's more parents out there with more brain space, more breathing space for their brain, then I am going to be absolutely fine with that. But really parents are carrying a huge mental load already. But when you're challenged with health issues or behavioral challenges in your kids, you're carrying that extra heavy mental load. Your brain is constantly problem solving, particularly if you're that sort of proactive parent. You can overthink everything. You're reading all the food labels, you're researching all the symptoms, you're looking at different supplements that might be helpful for your child, you're meal planning, you're trying to navigate different taste preferences among your children, you're managing reactions, you're worrying about your kid's future. This creates chronic cognitive load and really, leads to this place where our brains are constantly switched on. And we lose the mental space that's needed for clarity, for creativity, for, looking after our family, because we feel so overloaded. So I want to give you permission to, pull back a little bit in terms of, looking for those answers and searching for that next thing that is going to sort of improve your child's health, their nutrition, their behavior, and give yourself that mental space. I know when I give myself that mental space, that's where my intuition kicks in. I think we're dampening our own intuition, which is powerful when we're parents. We need to really tap into that intuition as to what's best for our family, what's best for our children. And when we're constantly looking and researching and, reading and listening, we don't have that breathing space to really tap into that intuition, which leads to a lot of confusion and overload. And as I said at the start of this episode, for those of you who might be at a similar stage of parenting to me with older kids, where you've got more physical space. But the emotional needs of your kids often increases, through the teenage years and even adult years. We don't stop just because our kids turn 18. My eldest is 18 now. I've got different worries and different sort of he needs me in different ways. And my daughter's 16 and she definitely needs me in different ways than she did when she was 6 as well. She's less physically, she was a very, very cuddly attached little girl. And now, she's not because she's 16 and I know that's very developmentally sort of appropriate. But the emotional load, the worries actually increase a lot because they've got more independence. They're struggling with different things with, boyfriends and girlfriends and friends and driving and independence and exposure to, different ideas and that are not aligned with, family values and all of that sort of thing, really sort of increases the emotional demands for us as parents at this stage. And so, it can feel a little uncomfortable. And I shared this a bit in last week's episode. This extra space that I've got, physical space and time that I've got, can feel a bit uncomfortable. And I can feel myself getting, restless or even bored at, in terms of me being in this really transition area, I guess. I'm sort of struggling to find words. But, it's coming back to who am I again after all of these years of parenting, and what do I want to do with this extra time that I've got? And, these different decisions to make, and that requires me allowing my brain to breathe a little bit more, to not feel guilty or even sad that I've got all this extra time. I find myself missing my kids and missing those family adventure days or the camping trips that we don't get to take as often anymore because, kids are working and they'd rather be with their friends. And so, I'm really sort of, I guess, leaning into this, giving my brain time to breathe, in the space that I have, and trying not to feel uncomfortable about all of that, or even allowing myself to feel uncomfortable in that space as well, I guess. So as you can hear, I'm working this out as I go along. This is something that I'm exploring. It really resonated with me, and so I wanted to do this follow-up episode because I think it's such an important message for us parents. And for me, you can see that, I'm learning a lot about this as I go. But breathing space, giving ourselves that breathing space, it helps our emotional regulation. It helps our patience. It helps give us more clarity in the decisions we need to make. It helps give us that resilience we need to support our kids as well. So the more capacity that we have in our own nervous system, the more that we can support our kids when they're struggling, or even when they're not struggling. We can be there and be more present for them. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, grabbing a copy of A Brain That Breathes, Jody Wilson's book. I listened to it on Spotify, yes, with my headphones in. So I'm not getting rid of technology altogether. Like, I run an online business. I need technology. It is essential in my life. So I'm not sort of telling you to move away from your phone altogether, as you've probably already gathered. But she reads the book, the audio book. She's got the most lovely relaxing voice. I'm still listening to it. I haven't finished it yet, but I'd highly recommend that you have a listen and think about how you can give your brain a bit of breathing space, how you can lean into some moments of soft fascination. And I would love to hear how this episode has resonated with you. Send me a message on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids, or you can email me, jessica@naturalsuperkids.com. I'd love to hear from you. I hope this episode has been helpful. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.